Wyoming's best adventure starts in Wind River Country, located in western Wyoming, just beyond Yellowstone National Park and the Grand Teton Mountains. Wind River Country is the place to go to get away from the crowds, unplug, unwind, and find room to roam. Wyoming's Wind River Country, Yellowstone's unique neighbor.
Hey folks, the adventure today with Wyoming's Wind River Country, Yellowstone's unique neighbor, is in a very, very small town called Jeffrey City. I'm joined by Kevin with the Riverton Museum. Kevin, how are you?
I'm good, how are you? It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back. We had the 100th anniversary of the Yellowstone Highway trek. Please go back and listen to that podcast. We had a ton of fun. Kevin, we have another really cool, quirky trek here with the Riverton Museum, and we have a historian with us, Zach Larson. Zach, how are you? Zach, I'm really excited because today we get to learn all about an area that once upon a time was bustling, kind of a metropolis for folks, with a bowling alley, a movie theater, it had a pool, it had, a lot of folks coming in and out. And we're talking about Jeffrey City, Wyoming, and we're going to talk about the uranium boom and all about that. But Zach, what's the population of Jeffrey City now?
We looked it up over the week. It was like 45. I'm going to kind of take you probably more or less chronologically from the start to the beginning of this town, where it came from, what it's doing now, maybe even what's going to happen in the future with it. I don't know that for sure because I don't know, but...
Zach, so you're kind of a uranium buff. You actually did your master's on uranium?
I wrote my master's thesis on not tangentially the uranium industry, but more about like the towns in Fremont County that the uranium industry brought. Basically, my thesis was that company towns did continue to exist in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and weren't altogether the worst places to live, because you read about company towns from back in olden times, and everyone talks about how everyone was treated so crappy, everyone was treated so poorly. You were basically slaves of the company, and I think sometimes we fail to think about that in the context of history. And I certainly wouldn't want to go live in a 1820s company town, but I honestly wouldn't want to go live in an 1820s anything town, because I like having indoor plumbing.
Well, today also, Zach, is interesting because Jeffrey City is a lot busier than normal. We came on a good day because they're having the Wyoming Jade Festival too. And so that'll be kind of an interesting thing to mention here on this podcast. If you're looking for some jade, mark that on your calendar for next year. Now, Zach, real quick before we get into the town of Jeffrey City, what is uranium?
Uranium is basically naturally occurring. It's an abundant resource. It's a naturally occurring resource. It is radioactive, and when it's refined appropriately, it can create massive amounts of heat, and it can also create massive amounts of destruction. But also that heat can be used to generate massive amounts of electricity. They call it the atomic age because of uranium, taming the atom. The possibilities of uranium were endless.
Well, Zach is going to take us through a little history lesson, kind of a trip through time here in Jeffrey City, talk about uranium. We're here at the Home on the Range, which is an old homestead type location. Zach, we actually have the current owner potentially coming out to chat with us a little bit more. But what do you know about Home on the Range?
So the guy that's going to potentially come talk to us, his great, I don't know how many greats, maybe none, grandpa, Beulah Walker was her name. I think it was Peterson. Beulah Peterson, her husband, was a veteran of World War I, had suffered mustard gas, basically. He had suffered that. They were from, I think, Nebraska, and he was told that he needed to get somewhere high and dry if he wanted to prolong his life. So they came here. They bought this cabin. They disassembled it log by log from a failed homestead and moved it to where you see it now in, I believe, the 1930s, 1931, 1932. And then in 1937, this highway that we're standing in front of that you're hearing all the time. Mr. Walker eventually died. Beulah eventually remarried Mr. Peterson, which is the family that owns it now. And they dug a well, they hit water at 17 feet. There's actually an awesome interview in the Wyoming State Archives that I'll put a link to it in that page that I'm gonna make for you guys. She was a poet, she was awesome. They started selling snacks in, I believe, 37. And then it was just that until the 1950s, and we'll get into that story a little bit later. It looks like we got a Peterson coming to...
Make me as anonymous as you want.
Yeah, so Bob came up rolling on his awesome vintage lawnmower there, Bob has got a great beard, and so just kind of giving you a description of Bob here at Home on the Range. Zach was just telling us a little history.
Tell us history, man.
Well,
See how accurate you are.
how far back is Beulah from you?
That's my grandma.
So your grandma
Yep.
was married to Mr. Walker originally.
Well, Sam Peterson originally,
Oh, so Peterson and then
and
Walker.
then Walker afterwards.
I get those two mixed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Petersons, they came here. He was a World War I veteran.
Yeah.
Had bad lungs because of mustard gas.
Bad circulation in
Okay.
his legs. They gave him 5 years to live and told him he had to get to a high, dry climate.
Okay, so
So he came up here, got a double allotment on Homestead, I think in 32. Somewhere I got the paperwork with the presidential signature and all that good stuff on it.
and this cabin, if I remember, it was not originally here. It was somewhere else. They disassembled
It's
it.
back where that Ford truck's sitting back there with the
Okay.
hood up. And when the highway went through, they drug it up, but then they added on to it in the back and on the sides and on the end over the years. The original cabin is the back half of this
Okay.
one right here. Yeah, they pulled all the logs off the Green Mountain Mule Team.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. The boys would stay down here. Sam and Arliss would stay down here, and Grandpa would go up on the mountain, cut the timbers, load them by himself. You know, he's dying.
Yeah.
He's sure he's dying. And the mule team would come down all the way by themselves down to here, and the boys would unload it, and then the team would go back up. They could do 2 loads a day. It didn't take them long. They weren't great carpenters, but they got the job done. It's still standing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
There's walls where the logs are just like hog-nailed to each other.
We're on a little history trek, and Zach is going to kind of talk more about the uranium and, of course, the history with that.
Yeah.
In Jeffrey
It
City.
kind of blew up when that got here.
you'll know this better than it. So Beulah called this place Home on the Range.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about this later on, but it became known as Jeffrey City. And when Beulah for years had been taking mail, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard that once it started being called Jeffrey City, she didn't like that too much.
Well,
And they say that she would return to sender anything that was not sent to Home on the Range, that was sent to Jeffrey City.
probably a fish story. She took her stuff pretty serious.
Yeah.
She was doing the weather up here too. So yeah, she was pretty much doing everything. The bus from Rollins used to come through here and stop, and so it was a waypoint. She rented cabins out during the hunting season. And
What was the population then?
Prior to the uranium boom, it was just them, wasn't it?
yeah, it was just this and the local ranches around.
Yeah.
That was it.
You had the
And then the town just kind of swallowed them here,
the
and then went away.
Claters over there and the
Yeah.
couple of other people. And
Yeah.
What's this contraption here with the windmill? Are you actually...
That was put in by a seismograph crew in, I believe, 41 maybe, when they were first up here shooting for uranium and oil and everything. The seismograph crews used to come in here, and they had moved the cabin up, but the well was still back there, hand dug, about 12 feet deep. And so they said, you need a well closer to the house. So they shot that, and then that's a Sears pump on that. I think the receipt from
it's actually
that's
pumping water then.
yeah, that's our well. 65 foot deep. It's the edge of the river here, so it goes through a mile of sand. It's hard. You can drink a gallon of it. It doesn't slake your thirst at all. Yeah, this spring I dug out that 125-year-old washing machine. We've been using that. Yeah, I just run hoses off a pump, and we got shower and bathroom outside, and
That's awesome.
yeah, it's all set up. We just kind of camp here.
Yeah, I love it. You have kind of like, you have a Tesla, so you have this new age stuff, and then you have this older vintage
Yeah,
style.
that's-
It's a mix of...
That's leading edge. I was one of the first 1,000 to get the self-driving stuff when it came out, so I'm
Isn't that
crippled
cool?
anymore. I grab the wheel and I'm dangerous.
Yeah, well, you have the best of both worlds.
That sign there, that was exchanged. The painting on that was exchanged for a tank of gas.
Huh?
That's 2 Coca-Cola signs.
oh, it is.
Yeah, that's still original paint. That's from way back,
Yeah.
like during the war.
Wow.
I paint the frame on it every once in a while, and the paint just falls off. But that thing there just stays.
It was well
Yeah.
worth the tank of gas, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this has been a cool place. We enjoy coming up here.
Do you live here year round, or is this
No, I'm from Tacoma,
okay?
but yeah, I don't think I could do what my grandma did up here. She was tough.
Bob, it was really cool chatting with you.
So everything on this side of the highway, at least in this kind of central area, was company property. So if you worked for the company, you could live here. And so you think of early company towns, and they were built with like log cabins or little cement houses or little brick houses. Jeffrey City came about. There's a really cool book that is hard to find. You'll have better luck in nerdy academic libraries, but it's got the best title I've ever heard of a history book, and it's called Wheel Estate, and it's about the history of mobile homes. And this is one of the horseshoe streets. So you'll notice there's like tennis courts right there, and this was a park. So the first houses that were built in Jeffrey City, the site-built houses were these. They were Boise Cascade houses. This is for key mill personnel. So to maybe backtrack a little bit on the history, there's a guy from Rawlins called Bob Adams. So Bob Adams was a phrase that I've heard that I like a lot is factual but not truthful. There's a Phelps Dodge book that described him as a short order cook, which is factual, but the truth is he was a restaurant owner. And so he probably did cook once in a while. But he read about Charlie Steenwijk in the Saturday Evening Post, and he was like hooked. He's like, I got to find this uranium stuff. So he saved $3,000, blew through all of it. And then he blew through another $70,000 looking for uranium. Came up empty. He once said that a urine sample would have tested positive for uranium because that's how obsessed he was with finding it. He founded a company called Lost Creek Oil and Uranium, and sold shares for 10 cents a piece, ended up raising $300,000. And then out here in this area, just back actually just south of here, found a viable deposit. He thought the best way to market uranium would be to mill it here too. So back before 1957, in 1953, uranium was discovered up in the Gas Hills, and about a year later, it was discovered down here. In those early years, the very first couple of years, it was all shipped on a truck, either to South Dakota or to Utah. One truckload at a time, and not refined at all. Big, and you're talking like for every barrel of yellow cake, you're probably looking at 10 truckloads because it has to be refined massively. In 1955, 54, somewhere in there, they opened a buying station in Riverton, right where there's that sulfuric acid plant that's just south of town. So the railroad was in Riverton. So basically you trucked your uranium to Riverton, you dumped it in a pile there, and then they loaded it onto trains, shipped it to South Dakota that way on the Chicago and Northwestern. In 1957, the first mill was opened just across the highway. It was the Split Rock Mill. We'll maybe drive by where it was. And basically, yeah, like you haul your ore there and it refines it into yellow cake, barrels of yellow cake, which is still like relatively stable. There's a jar of yellow cake on display at the museum. Don't breathe it, but it's not refined enough to be like you're going to die imminently if you come in contact with it. And he knew that you needed to look where you're at. Who's gonna live out here if there's nowhere to live, right? It's the middle of nowhere. He wanted to build a town. And there's two of these streets that are shaped like horseshoes. And he built like modular Boise Cascade homes around them. If you go, I think Wood Street and Lander has a lot of those houses, because when they sold off the town, a lot of them were truck shipped to Lander. You buy one of these houses for $3,000 and haul it to Lander. And then the rest of the town basically was mobile homes. And that actually had some advantages, believe it or not. One of them is that if you are in your own private, it was like a bring your own home. So you get your home shipped here and then you'd hook it up to the utilities. Starting in about 1955, 56. As they're building the mill, if you look back at old newspaper articles, there's like this one, like one of those community corner things. And there's this one that's so funny to me that I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but the person writing for the newspaper is, so-and-so's mobile home arrived this week, and it's a big, beautiful model, and it has this giant picture window on the side, and the appliances are the most beautiful lime green you've ever seen, and just so then it was like a cause for celebration when a family's mobile home finally made it into town. One of the advantages was like the company had a little bit more limited ability to police everything that you did because you owned your house, even if you didn't own the ground it was parked on. Another one is the town dries up. Imagine having bought a site-built house here in 1978, and then it dries up. Who are you going to sell it to? It's basically worthless. Whereas your mobile home, ironically, can move. You can haul it up, and it actually has more value in some ways than the site-built ones. And it was like, there's this gushing article about a modern metal like uranium needs a modern town. And uranium is a metal. Those big buildings, those long buildings up there, but those are the bachelor dormitories. Basically, you live there, it's like a bedroom with a bathroom, and then you get meal tickets to go to any of the restaurants that they had in town. They had a hamburger shack, they had the Split Rock Cafe, they had a couple of other places, because bachelors can't cook, right? Are you crazy? They're men, for crying out loud. There were 2 grocery stores. One of the interviews I did was with a guy named Neil Blumenrader. His family ran one of the grocery stores. His family was friends with Bob Adams, and they were from Raleigh. So the guy that founded was like, I need a grocery store. Do you want to come build one? They're sure. And he was pretty hands-off. It wasn't like, they took dollars. They didn't take script wages like the old company towns of forever ago. My dad says, he used to drive through here all the time. When that grocery store was still open, he said that they had the best rotisserie chicken. I don't know what it is about it, but so yeah, they had a grocery store. They had a bowling alley, which is one of the buildings. Bob Adams, the company, didn't want to run anything that he didn't absolutely have to. They actually wrote a check to Fremont County, especially in the later years, to have Fremont County just have an extra sheriff's deputy out here to provide law enforcement because he didn't want to have a company cop. John D. Darnell lived in that blue house. He passed away about a year ago, but I also interviewed him, and he's awesome. All of the kids that I interviewed, they're not kids, they're 10 years older than me, 15 years older than me, whatever, 20 maybe. They all graduated in the late 70s. They were in high school here. And a lot of them had fond memories of being busted by Deputy Darnell from their drinking parties out in the backwoods, having fun, partying. And he would just make them go home. So that's 1970. So it grew explosively in the 1970s. In the 1960s, it turns out uranium was a little bit more abundant than the US government thought. And they're like, wow, we had a lot of sources of uranium in our own country. So they're like, all right, guys, turns out we've got tons of uranium. We originally contracted you could produce through this year, X year. We don't know if we're going to be able to guarantee that we can keep buying it after that point. So we can either stretch it out another 3 or 4 years and pay you a lower rate, but it'll keep you in business a bit longer, or you can keep your original contract. They called that the stretch out period. And it didn't die, but the uranium industry went into decline through the 60s. And then in 1974, they basically announced that they were going to allow privately developed power plants to uranium nuclear power plants to be developed. And so that's when a lot of the nuclear power plants that we have in this country were developed and came online is in the 70s. And the price of uranium shot up way past what it had ever been in the 50s and 60s. Because again, it was like, we have this miracle metal that basically makes electricity out of thin air with almost no waste. Who's not going to love this? So they went hog wild, and they got you couldn't get enough uranium basically. So at its peak, Jeffrey City had somewhere around 5,000 residents. I think it was 1977. One of the uranium companies that was big in the Gas Hills called Lucky Mac, it was named after Neil McNeese. They opened a big, huge mine back there on Green Mountain as well. They needed housing too. So we'll drive up there, but the nicer subdivision up on that hill was the Lucky Mac subdivision. And then it was a trailer court on the other end of town. They contracted to build basically another trailer court for their workers. And since Bob Adams didn't want to run a grocery store, he didn't want to run a whole bunch of these, he basically didn't want to micromanage. He wanted to have as close to a normal town as possible. They just built on. And in fact, all the uranium companies in the area, once this became a multi-company town, every year Western Nuclear threw a big company picnic. Every summer. It was the highlight of the summer. It was a blowout. Everybody loved it. And then when other companies came into town, they just joined on. They Lucky Mac said, hey, yeah, we'll contribute. What do you want? And it was just a huge party. So yeah, it grew explosively, and there was a lot of transient workers, people that come and work for a little bit, but they found that if you could get families to come here, that you actually had a more stable workforce and they were less crazy. And there's one story that I found in the Jeffrey City News, which I'll also put a link to. I read one article about some dude had his buddy staying in one of these dorms over here, and the streetlight was keeping him up all night, so he shot it out with a shotgun. And so the company caught wind, and they're like, all right, and you're fired. Move out now. Be gone. Can't be shooting shotguns at our streetlights. It doesn't surprise you at all to find that a lot of single, unmarried miners aren't exactly the most good workers that you would find. So they really wanted to attract families. In the late 70s, also, Western Nuclear was bought out by Phelps Dodge. Big copper mining company. They've been in the business since the 1800s. And they had a lot of experience running company towns. So they actually undertook a big expansion project to build multifamily housing, to attract people to come and move here and want to stay here and want to raise their kids here. And for a few years, it was great. A lot of the kids that grew up here loved it. And you hear stories about them, you hear them talk about how everybody just knew who you were and where you belonged, so you couldn't get into too much trouble. But one of those come home when the street lights turn on sort of thing. So the people that grew up here absolutely love it. They can't talk enough praise about growing up in Jeffrey City. And you come here now and you're like, wow, it's different. Just a little. So one of the amenities that was provided by the company was your water bill. So if you were lucky enough to live in a company provided trailer spot, you didn't pay for power or water. This guy named Hub Thompson, was an entrepreneur, and you're telling me I can start a business in Jeffrey City and I don't have to pay a water bill? So he started a laundromat and a car wash.
So your name is Tom?
Yeah.
Tom, what's your last name?
Redland.
And Tom, you're here at the Wyoming Jade Festival, and I assume this beautiful jade that we have surrounding us and some other pieces you found yourself?
Yeah.
Holy cow. How do you find this stuff?
Walk many a mile.
We were talking earlier with Zach Larson about some of the finding of uranium and how they prospected it. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of how you figure out where jade is?
Oh, we just find the float wherever glaciers or whatever's deposited it.
How long have you been looking and finding jade?
Oh, I've lived here 52 years and I haven't really hunted jade much since the last 10 years. I'd pick it up if I found it, but it's hard to find.
Here, what was this that you were showing me with the light?
It's the agatized wood. What they figure is there was wood there and then a different mineral come in and took the place of the wood and it formed like the wood was. So.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but when you look at this rock, I personally would not know that this is jade. Would anybody else?
Yeah, I find small little rocks of jade, but nothing as close to the fine pieces here. But I recognize the color and the distinctive features.
This is cool. You have a passion for finding it then.
Oh yeah. I hunt a lot with this guy over here. He's a lot better at it, as you can see.
Yeah, it has quite a few more rocks than you, Tom. But you're on the podcast, so.
He's been at it longer than I have.
So which county do you find the most jade in without giving away your secrets?
Just around here in Fremont County.
Fremont, yeah.
And we find different shades of it here. There's apple green, emerald. This is olive. There's different grades of olive. This is a lighter olive. This is darker olive. That's in between olive. I'm just a rock hound.
Yeah, a rock hound.
Rock hounding was a major hobby of Jeffrey City residents since the beginning, it seems like, from the done. It's
the
a place for
back in the 40s and 50s, it was everywhere, and that it really got popular. And so now it's really hard to find a bigger piece like this. Even small ones it's been hunted so hard that it's getting really rare to find anything.
During your adventures walking around looking at various rocks, have you noticed some success at actual anthills where you can find a nice piece?
I haven't, no.
I have on my land and it's fascinating. I don't know if
I'm
it's
sure
dumb
there's
luck, but
there's little micro pieces of it in there, but I've looked at anthills. But
Doing some cool history learning and history at home on the range and the owner. And then Zach was telling us about the bachelor housing right here for some of the folks too. What do you remember from back in the day?
I moved here in 1972, and uranium was starting to pick up big time, and they just started opening more mines and hiring more people, and they built these apartments. There was a lot of people. There was 65 to 7,000 people living here at one time. And we had bad winters, and I remember trailer houses that were covered with snow back here, riding snow machines over the top of their houses.
78, 79.
We had one in 2023 just as bad. We had 12-foot snowdrift. Snowed in here. Couldn't get to town to get groceries, but we learned a long time ago to stock up. So we're used to winters like that. So.
Tom, it's cool learning about this area. Isn't it crazy how it used to have all those things and all these people, and now it's...
Yeah, my dad bought a ranch here, and then he sold it about 1979 or 80, I think it was. I went to work in 78 for the uranium mines up here. Worked till they closed them down. I think it was about 1982, I think, when the last one pretty much closed down. Then it was a few years they started reclaiming them, and I spent the rest of till I retired covering up the holes we dug.
That good old yellow cake.
Yeah, I spent more time on reclamation jobs in the mines than I did mining, and they're getting close to getting them all done.
There's been buzz about this area again. Have you heard it?
Oh yeah, yeah. My daughter-in-law, she works for a uranium outfit south of here. Yeah. They do the in situ mining. Then the nickel, I worked for that guy last summer. He's not doing any drilling this year, but
Yeah, it's been cool to talk to you and learn more about not only the area, but I feel like it's come full circle with Zach's lesson about the area. We were able to talk with Tom, who's lived here for quite some time, Bob, who owns the home on the range, too. So, Zach, this has been a pretty cool, immersive experience.
Yeah. We ought to always plan it for Jade Week.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Or Jade Fest or whatever.
There's other people here that probably got more experience in the uranium than I do. But
hey, you worked in it.
Oh,
you
yeah.
lived here. That's about as close as you can get. And it's fascinating what this place once was. Will it ever see its glory again? Probably not.
I doubt it, but
Yeah.
you never know.
Be good to get you a grocery store back here again, Tom. Right?
We had two of them
Yeah.
for a while. Had a coast-to-coast hardware store.
What was your favorite place to eat back in the day?
Oh, this one down here, the old couple that owned it
That's what I heard.
his wife was a super cook, and before I was married, I'd go in there and get a steak on a platter that big, and the potatoes were on the side, and $5.
Nice.
Oh, man. A day.
Sounds so good.
Yeah,
Nowadays it costs you $40
Oh,
for the
completely.
same meal at least.
at least.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. We have some people move here just to retire, and some of them spend a bad winter and they pack up and leave.
Tom, thanks for letting us bug you.
Okay.
We just did a little drive. We actually carpooled to Jeffrey City, which is about, 45 minutes. Zach, that was a great history lesson. There's so much to unpack in that. It's crazy that this small little, almost ghost town has so much history.
Yeah, so many people live there. So many people made careers there, raised kids there. People still live there. We got to meet some Jade folks, which
Yep.
was cool.
And so, Kevin, we talk a lot about the Riverton Museum and the treks here with the Wind River Visitor Council's podcast, which is Wyoming's Wind River Country, Yellowstone's unique neighbor. You have some really cool stuff planned throughout the year, but I did want to mention to keep an eye on this next year because it could potentially change with some really cool, maybe even more interactive stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We have two coming up, one September 7th, one on September 14th. Those are, I think, two of the most exciting ones, other than this one, of course, that we have this year. So go check those out at FremontCountyMuseums.com.
Zach, is there anything we missed on Jeffrey City and uranium?
Yes and no. There's like an infinite amount of
can go
stuff you can
forever.
learn. Yeah, but I think we covered I think we covered the bases. I'll put a resources page together, which
Great.
you guys can each share. And then also, I'll put a plug in for Kevin. I used to run the museum. I was the site director, and the current staff is. I thought I did a pretty good job, but the current staff makes me pretty glad that I quit my job because they're doing an awesome job. The stuff that they've done with the exhibits is amazing. The work that Kevin does in getting events, they're some of the best events I think this museum's ever put on.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun. We encourage folks to support your local museums. Please go in, take a walk around. Many times they're open. Things are absolutely free to come in sometimes to check things out. If you want to check out some of the treks, they're very inexpensive. $10 for this trek. Other treks are a little bit different depending on where they're going and what is involved. But make sure you subscribe to this podcast or share it. Zach, share it with all your friends.
Okay.
Kevin, you as well. This is another edition of Wyoming's Wind River Country, Yellowstone's unique neighbor. Make sure you subscribe. Find us online with Wyoming's Wind River Country.
Thanks for tuning in to Wyoming's Wind River Country, Yellowstone's unique neighbor. Visit us at windriver.org and follow Wyoming's Wind River Country on Facebook and Instagram. This podcast has been brought to you by the Wind River Visitors Council.